kind of in the early planning stages of that, we asked the boys each, a couple, 2 or 3 places that they wanted to visit. And my younger son, Cormac, said Spain. And he at the time was 7. So we had to explain to him, we cannot drive to Spain, but even to this day, he still says he wants to go to Spain. And then my older son, Gavin, he really wanted to go to California. So we made it to the Pacific Ocean. Yeah. Ben and I every day are like, can we go back on the trip again?
Ben and I were police officers in the city of Richmond. So we both worked 4th Precinct, which is like northeast side of Richmond at the time. I don't know if they redistrict or anything, but one of my favorite memories when we were on patrol together, Ben had marked out with somebody real quick, and so I go over there and I roll up and Ben is in the middle of having to, have a fight with this gentleman, and we jump out and, get him into handcuffs, and we let the guy cool down in the back of the car, and Ben very calmly composes himself and starts to talk to me about cooking because he knows I love cooking. And he taught me that you can burn olive oil that day. And it's just so cool because, like, here you are, we just went through what has the potential to be a traumatic experience together. And we got things calmed down, and you immediately flipped the switch. And talking to you the other day, I realized that that's just who you are. When, things are tough, you resolve them. You flip that switch and you turn it into something beautiful, which is what you and your family have done.
I have recollection of the talking to you about the cooking. I don't remember the fight on Chamberlain, but there was probably more it stood out more to me that I got to share about cooking with you than the fight on Chamberlain. That's just work, that happens. So at the time, this was about 5 years ago, Denise is a veterinarian, an equine veterinarian, and she had a thriving 2-doctor equine practice with her partner. And I was 16 years into my police career, 9 or so years as a detective at that point, 5 or so years on the SWAT team at that point. So I was doing all the things that I wanted to do in my law enforcement career, and Denise was doing all the things that she wanted to do in her veterinary career. And we had 2-year-old and 4-year-old savage little monkeys, our boys, and it was pretty perfect. We were going on adventures every other weekend when Denise wasn't on call. And if it was winter time, we were heading into the mountains of West Virginia to go skiing. And Denise was staying fit and running and biking and swimming and using those as her escape, so that not only could she stay fit, but it was her almost like a meditative time where she was alone and doing her endurance training. And it was a Sunday morning, and her alarm went off at 5:30, and she sprung out of bed. I used to say that she woke up like a light switch, and I do not. So she's out the door probably 6 or 6:30-ish, 6 o'clock. June. It's going to be light out when she runs, but she still has a reflective vest on, may have even had blinking lights on there. And it was her long run day. So she's probably looking at anywhere between 6-8 miles, depending on where she is in her training. And so 6 to 8 miles should take about 50 minutes to 65, 70 minutes. And so I hear the boys starting to rustle and wake up around 7:20. So then I spring out of bed because I don't want those monkeys free in the house and being able to get into anything.
They're his alarm clock.
So
absolutely.
I get ready, and then they're finally waking up, and I scoop up the oldest one, Gavin, and go into the youngest one's bedroom, Cormac, and we start reading some books, read that for a little bit, and then I feel like it's time to get them ready for breakfast. So I send them into their bathroom to start brushing their teeth and start getting ready. And I go past the clock and I see that it's 7:30. And so if she left at 6 o'clock, at 7:30, 90 minutes later, unless she was planning on doing a 10 or 11 mile run, which she could do, it just wasn't what her plan was, she should have been home by now. So I called her phone and it went straight to voicemail. And at that point I knew something was wrong, because I knew that she was on call, on emergency call for her veterinary practice. So she had her pager with her, she had her cell phone with her. So she should have responded to that in case it was a client calling or what have you. So at that point I knew something was wrong, and I got the boys ready to go, dressed, grabbed a handful of snacks, because we were going to go find Denise. And after I got them up into our truck, sheriff's deputy pulls up the driveway. And at that point, you know, with law enforcement, if a police officer is coming to your house and you haven't done anything wrong, to me, it's a notification.
Yeah.
And my little way of controlling it and not letting it be a death notification was just to ask him, where did they take her, or where did she go?
Yeah.
And he was a, big strapping Hanover deputy, the kind of deputies that you wanted to get out of their car to come back you up type of thing, 6'3", 225 plus pounds. You knew that he was going to be able to do his job, but he was coming to tell another cop that something happened to his wife.
Absolutely.
And so I could see on his face he didn't want to be there. Understandably, I mean, I've had to do death notifications and had to go tell people that their loved ones in the hospital. And those are people that you have no commonality with. And so I understood, and there was almost a look of relief on his face when I broached, where is she?
Right. You understood from your perspective as a police officer that it was probably, man, you even reached out to somebody else in that moment and in a way comforted him as well, because you and I have both been on the other end of having to do that. So, I mean, you took the weight off of his shoulders, and I'm breaking into that just to let you know that I see a real caregiver in you, and I think that's amazing. So, what feelings were going through your mind? I mean, I'm sure that outwardly that you were, very composed, obviously enough to take another person's emotions into consideration. What were you feeling on the inside?
Just where was Denise? I just know that I needed to get to her, because I figured that something had happened to her, but I knew that I was going to find her. So that was kind of a relief there, that it was at the hospital and I wouldn't have to, the boys wouldn't have to see anything of that happened to Mama. So from there, I just headed to the hospital, which is about 25-30 minutes away from us. And on the way, I called a teammate on the SWAT team just to kind of help out and say, look, Denise was hit by a car and she's now just been flown to the hospital. And so he took care of everything else. After that, he got my big brother on the SWAT team, kind of like your mentor on the SWAT team, going there, got the executive officer, the team commander, and he also went out to the hospital, so that I had people there. And thankfully all those guys have kids, so they knew what to do with our guys, and our guys had, superheroes and books and everything to be occupied, and still too young at that point to recognize that something life-changing had occurred. They just know that we're at the hospital because Mama got hurt. And early on, I recognized that, yes, my team guys were there at the hospital, but I hadn't seen Denise yet, but at this point I knew that if she was flown to the hospital, I'm going to need a lot more help. And so the next person I called was my dad. And thankfully, he's retired. He was retired at that point. He
From
had,
law enforcement.
yeah, he
and
had,
military.
he had, yeah, he had 40 years in law enforcement and 35 plus years National Guard and active duty Army. So he's lovingly referred to as the Colonel. The boys call him the Colonel instead of Grandpa. And so I called the Colonel up and let him know what had happened. The doubly hard thing about that is 14 years prior to this, my mom had been killed in California by some guys who were running from the police, and they gave me notification when we lived here in Richmond, and I had to call my dad and let him know that that had happened to my mom. And so 14 years later, now I'm calling and saying that Denise is in the hospital from another,
Vehicle.
avoidable criminal act. So,
Oh wow. So I mean, is that so? So it was a hit and run. I guess I never really asked that question. I mean, it was a hit and run.
yeah. So yeah, I kind of skipped that. So Denise was out running against traffic. So she's on the correct side of the road. It's a country road, unposted. So it's like 45 miles an hour at that spot. This guy had been up all night working a waitering job in the restaurant business, then gone to his friend's house, had a few more drinks there and
Who knows
playing
what else?
games, and then was driving home at 6 o'clock in the morning, going over 60 miles an hour in his SUV, crossed the WL line, struck Denise from behind, knocked Denise into a farmer's field, about 50 yards into the field, knocked her out of her shoes. He got his car stuck in the field, had to drive like 300 feet through the field to get his car out of the field. And Denise is laying in this soybean field. A guy.
Do you remember anything prior to this? Do you remember anything?
We're not real sure when she started forming her own memories. But Denise just said, I'm getting ahead of myself. So we didn't really do a rundown of the head to toe injuries that she had. So she was thrown into that field and wasn't discovered until an hour and 20 minutes later.
Wow.
By a passing cyclist. And it's a Sunday morning, so not a lot of cars would drive by Denise. And if you're going 45 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, you might not see somebody lying in a field. And if something catches your eye, you're going to look, but you're already past it. And then you look in your rearview mirror and you might not see it. So there was a lot of car parts and debris in the road from where the car hit Denise and, broke off. Everybody's seen an accident, bumpers fall off and
There was
mirrors-
no bumper.
mirrors fall off and fender pieces and all of that. So that all was littered the middle of the road. And so Peter, the cyclist, probably going around 20 miles an hour, sees this and is able to look up and see, oh, well, hey, something's wrong here, and sees Denise in the field. So he screeches to a halt, hops off his bike, runs down and checks on Denise. And he sees that she's barely breathing, almost snoring against, resistance. So in a panic, he runs up to this farmhouse that's behind this huge, gorgeous oak tree. So if they looked out the window, they couldn't have even seen Denise. And so he runs up and he's beating on the door to get them to come to the door. And so they finally come to the door and he tells them what's going on and they call 911. And we're in a rural part and we're served by a couple of different firehouses, but they're on, 2 or 3 man per firehouse. And at this point in the year and their staffing, the actual ambulance was in the center of the county, so it could respond anywhere. So what they had available was they sent a fire truck and their rapid response vehicle, which is a Ford Explorer, from 2 different firehouses. So thankfully we're halfway between, so only a couple of miles from each firehouse.
Yeah.
And they get there, and Dallas, the lead fireman off the truck, was very experienced. Actually, all those guys were really experienced. So they knew what they were doing. And as soon as Dallas got off the truck, before he even got to Denise, he started radio in asking for the helicopter. And so the helicopter is coming from 10 minutes away, lands in a farmer's field with no power lines, no issues. They're able to get Denise onto the helicopter. And then we're 10 minutes away from, I consider, the best emergency hospital on the East Coast, but it's at least the best emergency hospital in Virginia. VCU Health Center, 10 minutes away, and that's where they take her. So the head down injuries that they assess when she gets there, she has a severe traumatic brain injury, multiple strokes in the occipital region of her brain, a brain hemorrhage, bilateral dissected carotids. So the carotid arteries were stretched and then snapped back, which causes damage, as you can think of it, stretching. And so what happens there, as it stretches and snaps back, it can swell. So she had one of her carotid arteries was completely occluded or stopped up, and the other carotid was partially occluded. So there's 4 vessels that provide oxygenated blood to your brain, your jugulars and your carotids. So one carotid was completely blocked, one is partially occluded, and she has a brain bleed. So you're looking at a blood flow to the brain problem, as well as a blood flow out of the brain problem. Going down the chain, she has multiple broken vertebrae in her neck and her back, broken ribs, lacerated liver. Was it lacerated liver or kidney? Lacerated liver, bruised kidney. Also in her neck, a severe brachial plexus injury, the brachial plexus is where 5 nerves come off of your spinal cord and innervate your upper quadrant, basically from your shoulder down to your fingertips, on each side of you. And so she has a severe brachial plexus injury. And then down into her leg, she has a tibial plateau fracture. So the bone, your lower leg bone, that basically your knee sits, is half of your knee, is fractured on the top part. And then she has an open tibula fibula fracture just above her ankle. So that means an open fracture is that the bones have broken through her skin. And she was laying in a farmer's field for over an hour. So to top all that off, she got a systemic infection from the open wound. So eventually it turned into a bone infection, which we needed to manage for several months, I think 4 or 5 months at least, to manage that. So with all of those injuries, the big thing that they're trying to deal with is keeping her alive. And one of the ways that they, assess that is called the Glasgow Coma Scale, which is where they assess basically how awake and responsive a patient is through their eye movement, motor movement, and verbal response. And all of us right now would be at a 15 on that scale. Denise was a 3 on that scale because you can't go lower than the 3. She had no response. She wasn't responding to pain. Her eyes were not responding to movement. She wasn't responding to any verbal cues or anything like that. So that's where she was on the she was a 3 for, I believe, the first 3 days of her stay there.
So did that I mean did that concern you? Because I mean it seems like you're, you know, the type of guy that probably looked at that and said that thing doesn't scare me, that number doesn't scare me. I that's okay. We can go, or what were you thinking?
That wasn't like you said, it wasn't an issue to me at that point. Yeah, I knew that she was there. You know, so when you come in as a crime victim into the hospital and you can't talk, they they assign you a trauma number as basically a code name, so that, because they don't know why the crime was there, they didn't know if she was targeted or
Right.
what. So was, this a domestic thing? Was somebody going to come looking for
Right.
Denise Ferrandi in the hospital? So she was TRN Essence. So her trauma name was Essence. So to me, that's a positive sign at that point, right?
How old is
And
that?
she likes to point out how old she was. At the time, she was 40,
One about to turn 2.
no, hun, 42, about to turn 43.
Okay.
So she was 42, but the
You two both look amazing. What the heck?
trauma Essence is a 30-year-old white female. So they thought she was a 30-year-old white female that just got launched into the farmer's field.
I can believe it. You knew that you knew how strong Denise was. Like, so in your mind, it was not even a question. She was just, it sounds to me like you just viewed it as another thing that you guys were going to get through.
I knew, and I know Denise's internal strength, her external strength, her desire not to quit, what her desire was. She was just shaken up pretty bad. There were some things that had to get straightened out for her to come back. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't completely strong during this whole thing. I leaned on my big brother on the SWAT team really heavily. I broke down several times in the waiting room, not in the room down with my boys while we were waiting to be able to go upstairs, but I had a real hard time with it being a crime. One of the things that I did, I wanted to live in the country to keep my family away from my job. I did the best that I could at my job to keep, the community safe, but also my family safe.
Did
I would
your
make-
police work experience, shift the way that you were viewing this as well?
Yeah, because it's part of me at that point. That's who I am and that's how I see things. Quickly on, everybody was calling it an accident, and I was saying, no, this is not an accident. This is an incident. An accident's where you accidentally knock something off the table, or you drive into the back of somebody at a red light and you're like, oh man, you're sorry, you exchange information. Or God forbid you do something even worse, like you hit Denise. You don't try to leave.
Yes.
As soon as you try to leave, this isn't an accident anymore.
No, it's not.
And it's an incident. But the only way that we're victims as a legal description of the incident.
It sounds like you were able to differentiate the incident and what you were dealing with. To me, I just would have felt so overwhelmed, and I would have gone, in my head, I would have said, I'm going to lose my wife, but how did you shift that? I mean, or how did you maintain that mindset of we can work through this?
What other way was there? So if we said, oh, I'm going to lose Denise, would my energy and focus be in the right spot to get the right people there to help me, surround Denise with the right people, make Denise's atmosphere and everything around her the right thing? Am I talking to the doctors in the correct way? I have a vivid recollection of talking to her orthopedic surgeon about her leg. And I said, she's very active. She's going to want to be able to do everything that she can on that leg. What are you doing to fix her leg? He said, that went tremendous. She's going to be able to dance, run, ski, do anything she wants on that leg. And if I hadn't had the mindset from the beginning that she's going to recover, then my position and my tone and the questions that I asked wouldn't put everybody else in the right mindset.
So how did you protect yourselves from that? Because so the default mode for most humans is, oh God, this is going to be catastrophic. Were there people that tried to like shift that mindset? And how did you take that positivity and get it to Denise, right? I'm sure you were surrounding her with love and positivity, right? So how did you do that?
So I got, my dad came down, he moved down for June, July, August, at least 3 months. Her sister lives 2 hours away. She has 3 boys, and she was able to move down. And as soon as she got off the elevator, I said, Jen, I need you to be Denise. I need to be here for Denise. Can you take care of the boys? And she knew once she had a job, she knew that she could do that. And so she was taking care of the boys. Luckily, she could work virtually at that time. And so she was able to basically move into the house, and she became the boys' surrogate mom. She was Aunt Jenny. She was Aunt Donuts. She would bring them donuts. And so that was her little thing for them. But she would drop them off at daycare. She would do some work. She would come in and check on me, check on Denise. My dad would spend 12 hours at the hospital. He would get there at 8 o'clock in the morning. He had done his workout, got his breakfast, and he came and he stayed outside of her room so that if I needed to go do something, he would come in the room and he would be with her. Or if I needed something done, he could take care of it. I mean, he's the colonel. I mean, he's a resourceful guy. He could take care of anything with a phone or with talking to somebody. And then her parents also came down and would stay for periods of time. I think it was probably the hardest on her parents because they couldn't, aside from helping out, that's a challenging place to be in, being the parents of somebody that you're used to being able to take care of, but they can't do anything for her.
Right.
It's up to the hospital. It's up to Denise. And so I think that was probably really challenging for them. But I would go home for dinner every night, and her dad would come in and spend the time with Denise, just holding her hand, talking to her. And then that would relieve me to be able to come home and have dinner with Jen and the boys. And then my dad would stay for a little bit just to make sure Dennis was okay. And then the colonel could come home after his 12-hour shift at the hospital.
Well, and it sounds like you have a lot of fighters and warriors in your family. And one of the most beautiful parts of your story is that, to me thus far, is that the family came together, because that is not an easy thing to do, to recognize that, from time to time we may need to step out of our lives for those that we love. And it wasn't just one person that did it. Everybody rallied, and that's so amazing. So
we are really lucky. Her brother and his family, they live in Florida. He flew up at least a couple of times. And one of the things that he was able to do, he got a bunch of pictures printed up, like at Kinko's or some photocopying place. And so I put those on the ceiling so that when Denise woke up, that would be like the first thing that she saw. My brother-in-law got us a Bluetooth speaker so that we could play music that Denise would want to hear. We put that behind her bed. My sister is a pharmacist, and she flew down, and she was down there for the really difficult time when Denise was in the ICU. And she would actually go out with me when the doctors and nurses and her critical care staff were rounding about Denise. So we were really blessed with having that group, that team that was able to be there for Denise.
So it sounds like you guys had the mindset and the drive to do what you had to do. How long, so obviously you survived, Denise. That's amazing. And you know, what a beautiful soul we still get to have in this world. So what happened after? Like, how long, what was the hospital stay? What did the recovery look like?
Right.
You know?